Great. Okay, so welcome everyone on behalf of the American Statistical Association. I would like to say hello. My name is Kristen Mohebi. If you're not familiar with me, I recently started working in the Executive Director's Office along with Ron and Donna. We are here today because we are having our second webinar in conjunction with our partners at the Nova Collective. As some of you know, we've been working with the Nova Collective to support us in our journey towards diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. So we really appreciate their support, and we would like to introduce our facilitators, Justin and Becca, who will be discussing how to be a multi-partial gatekeeper. Before they begin and introduce themselves, I'd just like to make note, if you have any questions at all that you would like to ask, please drop them in the chat. Otherwise, if you'd like to ask an anonymous question, Casey is on as well, and you can send her a private chat with any questions you want to ask anonymously. So Justin and Becca, you can take it away.
Thank you, Kristen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to How to Be a Multi-Partial Gatekeeper. This is our second session, so if you attended the first session, welcome back. Thank you. We're so happy that you joined us again. And for those that are attending for the first time, welcome. We are super excited about this particular session. And so once again, it's decision making and how to be a multi-partial gatekeeper. And so that we are not talking heads, we would love to introduce ourselves. So as you see on the screen, my name is Justin Key. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I will be one of your co-facilitators for today's session. Just a little bit of a background. We come from the Nova Collective, which is a women-owned, minority-owned the diversity, equity, and inclusion firm based out of Chicago, Illinois, who wanted to just do business differently and not the norm that we've seen that has been so laced in tradition that it has just unintentionally and sometimes intentionally excluded a lot of different people. And so we're here with the Nova Collective, and just a little bit of background about myself. So I'm based in Los Angeles, California, but I'm a farm kid from Tennessee. So if the y'alls fall off trippingly from my tongue, you know that's where that comes from. I am a mathematician by trade, as well as a college professor, and also work in entertainment here in Los Angeles. And I would not be doing this session without the most incredible co-facilitator that the Midwest and East Coast has ever seen. I will now turn it over to Becca Barish.
Hey, everybody. Also, I just want to acknowledge that I'm seeing what people are writing in the Q&A about the chat being disabled. I think that Casey is handling that right now. Let's see what Casey said. Thanks for the heads up. Okay, so Casey, let us know if we can enable the chat, or otherwise people can just keep talking through the Q&A area and we can talk through that, but we will make sure that we are attending to that.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Becca, sorry.
No worries. Thanks all. Yep, chat should be good now. Thank you, friends.
Okay, awesome. And thanks to everyone also for letting us know that that was going on, because it shows your enthusiasm toward making sure that your voices are going to be heard, which is exactly what we want. So thank you. And yes, to go back to what Justin was saying about me being amazing, appreciate it. Yes, my name is Becca Barish. My pronouns are she, her, hers, or they, them. I am living in Chicago, Illinois, but currently in Cape Cod, Massachusetts with my girlfriend's family right now, which is helpful because they know that I do have a job. And my background is in social work, specialized with people that struggle with panic and anxiety. Been working with Nova Collective with Justin basically from the jump. Really excited to be here with you all today and having these conversations. Yes, and thank you for I love that the chat, we're already seeing everyone in there, and we love to see that because we understand that this is a webinar. And in other ways, we also want things to feel as conversational as they can, given whatever restrictions that we still might have. So in terms of today and what you might be able to expect from our time together, by the end of this workshop, we're going to understand biases better and thinking about dominant narratives in decision-making. If someone's like, I don't know what you mean by dominant narratives, that's okay. That's part of what we're going to be talking about today. Recognizing the impact of unconscious biases in decision-making, very often there can be this feeling of, I want to get rid of all of my biases. The reality is that would be nearly impossible. And so we want to understand, what are those biases? How do those come up? And how do those impact our decision making, so we can be more mindful of that? Understanding the importance of considering counter narratives for balance, acquired knowledge of multi-partial decision making and its benefits for inclusivity and fairness, and finally, learning strategies for cultivating multi-partiality. And again, if there's words in what I'm saying right now that we don't yet have context for, that's also going to be part of our goal, to make sure that you understand what we mean by those things by the time that we are done today. As far as expectations for engagement, some things that we want you to be mindful of as it relates to expectations. We say monitor your airtime, but honestly, any thoughts that people have in the chat, whether it be questions that you have, comments that you want to make, things that you might be wrestling with, by all means, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try to respond to them as best as we can. Speaking from personal experience, what we mean by that is there's no need for people to be speaking on behalf of others, or to feel like you have to be tokenized to speak on behalf of an entire group that you belong to. Just you alone. That's all we want from you. Lead with curiosity, not judgment. There might be different people that are in different stages of their understanding of these concepts, but really coming from that place of curiosity, knowing that we are all learning together. Justin and I talk about this a lot, where we're always learning new things. We're coming in with a sense of nervousness and anxiety. So hopefully, you know that we're in this with you as well. Being fully present. We're not here for that long. And so really trying to be as with us as you possibly can be. What's learned can leave, what is said stays. What we mean by that is that we hope that the things that we talk about are put into action coming out of our time together, but there's absolutely no reason to be specifically saying what people in the session say. Let's hope that we can respect that confidentiality. Great question, Stan. As far as multi-partial being supposed to be understood as more or less the same as impartial, we have a perfect slide that I think is going to capture that idea that we'll get to a little bit later, in terms of understanding the difference between multi-partial and impartial, because they actually are quite different when we break it down. Also, even if we have the best of intentions in here, there might be times where we might say things that can have a negative impact on someone else. And so we still want to make sure we're taking responsibility for that even if our intention is great, we want to take responsibility for the impact. And finally, this idea of comfort, safety, learning edges. We think that discomfort plays a really important role in the work that we do together. And so not only are we not just guaranteeing that we are all going to be in our comfort zone the entire time that we're here, but we think that getting out of our comfort zone is a really important way for us to be able to learn more, to be able to experience more. I think that it's possible that I'm either freezing or Justin is freezing. So if people want to let me know in the chat which of the two are happening. But Justin, can you go to that next slide?
Yes.
Great. That we want to get out of that place of comfort, get into that brave space, and then at the same time, making sure that we're not going so far into our danger zone that we're so activated or triggered that we're not able to take in information. So right on that learning edge is when we're in that brave space, but not so far over that we're not able to take in. So again, just challenging people to embrace that discomfort and know that that's okay.
Thank you for that. So we have a check-in. I believe we can definitely, Kristen, is it possible to make Becca and I co-hosts? Because I want the participants to do this particular check-in in a breakout session.
Okay, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So in your breakouts, you'll be with about 3 people. And so what we want is for you to use this check-in question, like, what are the benefits of unbiased decision-making? Like, have you experienced it? Have you been on the receiving end? Like, oh, this felt very equitable. This felt in a way in which I, feel like I am actually being seen, I'm being respected. And so that's
Justin, I'm sorry to jump in, but I just want to make sure, I don't think we can do breakouts in a webinar because
got it. Okay.
the participants are in a don't have access to audio and video.
Got it.
So
Okay, cool.
sorry for that.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for that, Donna. So let us know in the chat, what are the benefits of unbiased decision making? Let us know.
We do have a poll that I just pushed through. Oh, is that the wrong one?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
the poll will go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's later. Okay.
Yeah, not yet. Don't look. Everyone, close your eyes. Don't look at the poll.
Yes,
we'll get to that. We'll get to that poll momentarily. But for right now, just thinking about this idea of the benefits of unbiased decision making.
Thank you for that, Don. More equitable decisions. I like that. I like that. Anyone else, let us know what are benefits of unbiased decision making. Lillian says it can catapult a person's career or life's journey. I absolutely agree. Things that others may have, they have been on the receiving end of bias for so long, but an unbiased decision can literally give them an opportunity that could literally just scale their career to heights that they haven't seen before. Barry says, feeling like everyone is heard and listened to. Julia says, inclusivity. Kathy, a sense of fairness for all involved. Access to multiple solutions to an issue. Now, Heidi, now have you seen the cheat sheet to this session? Because I love that answer, and that really encapsulates what we are definitely. Well, you're right on target with everyone else. So I really, really, really do appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think to even go back to what Don said about more equitable decisions, right? That we're not just thinking about everyone in the exact same way, but thinking about how are we acknowledging the differences of the individuals that we work with in ourselves, so that we can think about what specific needs are from one person to another, as opposed to just assuming that it's going to be the same across the board from one person to another, which I think can help with those ideas of having everyone feel heard, listened to, that feeling of inclusivity, fairness, all those other things that people are sharing in the chat.
And so, and as we continue, and definitely happy that it had already kicked off in the chat about certain definitions. So thank you for that, Stan. So what we're going to, and just keep this top of mind as we think about equity throughout today's session, especially in the decision-making process. And we're going to get into some definitions and really start defining the work, because a lot of the words just in the space of diversity and equity and inclusion, they're used interchangeably, and they're not always the same, especially even when we come to bias. And Stan, you know what? It definitely is a loaded term, and so that's why we're going to break it down in this context for this particular session. So, as Becca stated, bias, because we are human, we have bias, and as I always state, unless you're from the Marvel universe, it may look a little different in the Marvel universe and the DC universe, but what we have here is unconscious bias, or you may know it by implicit bias. And these are the learned stereotypes that operate outside of our conscious awareness. And so with this particular biases, it's ingrained. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional, and it really does affect the way that we behave, and we behave towards others, and even how we treat others. And so because this unconscious bias is there, it really does affect the way that we move in the world, we think in the world, how we lead, how we make decisions, how we act. And so with thinking about, as you see on your screen, that it's so ingrained. Now let me ask you, and let me know in the chat, where do these biases come from? if they're so ingrained, sometimes they can happen unintentionally. They just fall trippingly off the tongue because we've seen them for so long or experienced them for so long. They just happen. So let me know in the chat, where do they come from? Our socialization, Stan, I'm right with you. You are right on target. Yeah, let us know. Where do these biases come from? If they're so unconscious, if we've had them for years, if somehow they're just there, and we're like, wait, why did that come? Like, it's not like student loans. Like, we know where student loans come from, but where do we? Well, I mean, that's a session. Jump right in. Media, family, personal experiences taught in the classroom. As Beck and Barish are very similar to a lot of you, like with just being professional students for so long. We do see that family culture, family beliefs, being repeatedly exposed to them from your family of origin, social media. So basically, we're just inundated with these biases from the day we're born to right now. Like, even if you watched news this morning before this session, even if you scrolled on social media, even LinkedIn, you see these things are being perpetuated, and sometimes we can think like, oh, this isn't my view, but somehow you seeing it over and over, it kind of sometimes latches on in a sense.
I'm curious,
Inertia.
Stan. Yeah, Stan, can you say more about historical inertia? I'm curious to hear more about. I don't want to put words in Stan's mouth in terms of what Stan means by that, but I would love to hear more about that. And I even to go back to what Lillian was saying about even things taught in classrooms, where sometimes we can think about something like education and be like, well, education is just this broad thing, and yet depending on where we live, depending on where we go to school, depending on our level of schooling, depending on who's in the classroom, depending on who's teaching the classroom, depending on the subject, right? Like there are never ending, just like countless possibilities for all the different places that some of that bias can come from in every moment of how we interact with other people. I think that if I were thinking about historical inertia, it might be about being pulled back to the things that we know from before and using that as a guide. But I don't know. And that's why that might be my own bias in terms of what I believe that to be, which is why I wanted to make sure it was understood by others.
So Stan, feel free to break that down in the chat. I'll move on to confirmation bias, but feel free to drop it in the chat, and then we'll definitely come back to that. So we have confirmation bias. And so this is the human tendency to search for favor, to confirm one's own pre-existing views on certain topics. And it's basically our brain's shortcut to be able to place, make a decision, confirm, pat ourselves on the back that these things that we were thinking were correct, almost as if we have a superpower, a magical ability. And so with confirmation bias, and I know that Becca is probably really tired of hearing me tell this story. And I think so with confirmation bias in undergrad, as I mentioned earlier, I was raised on a farm in Tennessee, but of course went to college. So I'm in the city, and it's my very first day on campus. I'm in the cafeteria, and you all, I am terrified. I am terrified not knowing anyone at the school. And my confirmation bias kicked in. And so I'm looking around the cafeteria and I'm trying to see who else would literally look like math, science, and engineering majors. And I scanned because I had already declared my major as mathematics. So I'm scanning the cafeteria, and I literally saw people who looked like me. They were doing homework at the table. They had glasses. They were all together, posh together. And I was like, I think these are my people. And I literally went to the table and said, hey, may I sit here? And they were the math and science majors. And my confirmation bias in that sense, felt right. But our confirmation bias can also kick in where we have these preconceived notions about people, and the smallest instance will then confirm that what we thought was correct. And that's almost the example of reading 12 different articles about a topic, and then that 11 articles are telling you that the biases are wrong and that it's incorrect. But you see that last 12th article, and you're like, I knew it. And then you go full-fledged forward with that 12th article, completely dismissing the 11 that you read previously. And so that is a way that our confirmation bias can kick in and literally create bias in that sense. Becca, did you want to address Stan's comment?
Yeah, so events of the past have deep impact on societies. Racism, for example, can be understood as a consequence of slavery. We still feel it today. That's historical inertia. That is so helpful and so true. Just in terms of there's the things that we are experiencing in the present, and there's the things that they are drawn from the past, and being able to understand those connections. So thank you for clarifying that so we can make sure that we understood.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Stan. So now we're going to jump to that poll question. And so Kristen is going to drop that in for you all to fill it out. But it says, what is your biggest hurdle when seeking diverse perspectives and input for decision making? So let us know in the poll. What is your
we've got limited access to a diverse network, overcoming unconscious biases, balancing different viewpoints effectively, ensuring inclusivity in the decision-making process. And also, I don't know if people are able to see what we see as the votes are coming in, but part of what I always find really fascinating about this as well is every answer always has at least a hit. And I think that speaks to just how many different reasons or hurdles can exist in our day-to-day as it relates to seeking diverse perspectives and input for decision making.
Mm-hmm. So it's never just one thing. Like there are so many different things that are at play.
We got 65% of you have participated. Let's see if we can pump that up a little bit more.
We're at 71%. So yeah, let us know. Let us know. What is the biggest hurdle when seeking diverse perspectives and input for decision making?
I think we could probably share it from there.
Okay. So from the poll, we have 22% said limited access to a diverse network, 4% says overcoming unconscious bias, 35% says balancing differing viewpoints effectively, and D, 39%, which is the highest, ensuring inclusivity in the decision-making process. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you all taking this poll and just being open and honest about it, because to be able to even say overcoming unconscious bias, that is work in itself. That is work in itself. As Becca said, we all have biases, and then first, in order to mitigate them, we first need to know and acknowledge that we have them. So thank you all for that.
I'm curious too, like even people probably chose which one resonated with them the most. If anyone wants to extrapolate on that anymore in the chat to kind of talk more specifically about either where you see that coming up or what feels difficult about that, or like why you might have chosen the hurdle that you did, we welcome that as well, just to get a sense of it. No, you don't have to, but sometimes it's cool to bring it to life a little bit more as well. So I had a moment where I was like, so critical, because often those who can ensure the inclusivity are not at the table. And that's interesting too, in terms of even when we're thinking about what ensuring inclusivity means and how people can aim to do that. But yeah, sometimes that has to do with certain levels of representation, and also that sometimes when a lot of individuals do not fall into certain underrepresented groups as well, they might not as easily see some of those biases that are at play, and it takes extra work to be able to be aware of it. So yeah, thank you, Lillian.
And Heidi says, D, because you want the process to move towards the intended impact. Without including the decisions and implementation, it just becomes an exercise.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And also, like, I sometimes say this at the top, and say today that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge other people by their actions. And so sometimes, even if our intentions are great, if that's not how it's being perceived by someone else, it can be very different. I think about that, even it's a little bit of a different category, but I can be very sarcastic without using a sarcastic tone. My intention might be to be silly or fun, but someone else might take that completely differently. And if I don't have awareness about the way that that lands, then I could be creating like more issues with people if I just stick so strongly to something just based on my intention without thinking about how that might be received by somebody else.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love when you state that, how we judge ourselves versus how we judge others.
Definitely.
So continuing in the space of biases and dominant narratives, we're now going to look at biases and dominant narratives specifically in decision making, because we know that we have them just in our day-to-day lives, but we want to really narrow the lens as it relates to the decision making process.
Yeah, and also to go back just that Heidi's right, and the same policies are just repackaged, and no true changes can occur for those they are supposedly meant to help. And I think that speaks to the action piece, right? It is definitely not my quote, and nor do I know where the quote exactly came from, but that would be really funny with like a picture of me in black and white on top of it saying it. But I should probably look to see if there's other sources for that. There's another one too that I really like that's like, the biggest misconception about communication is the illusion that it's taking place. That so often we believe that we are communicating so effectively when in reality that's not happening at all. Also not mine. So we can look that up too. Maybe I'll look it up at a certain point when Justin's speaking. And to go back to Lillian's point that this is about action, right? When we're talking about inclusivity, it's not just something that happens, it's something that we do. It's the choices that we're making. And so we need that to happen for change to occur. Now, when we're talking about dominant narratives in decision-making, I'm going to share a little bit about what we mean by dominant narratives. So dominant narratives are stories told by the dominant culture that define reality and guide our lives. Oftentimes, this is what most of society believes to be true. These can show up as stereotypes and assumptions about other groups. So just to clarify this a bit more, it's not to suggest that dominant narratives are not necessarily true for anyone. It's just that sometimes there's certain ideas that we can believe to be true. And when we believe that it's true for everyone, that can be at the expense of other people's voices or other people's experiences. So I'll give an example of this, and I hope people can help me with this. When we think about the American dream, right? When we think about the American dream, can people share in the chat what comes up for you when I say American dream, as far as what is the American dream? What does that entail? And what are the expectations as it relates to the American dream? So I'm going to give a moment for people to be able to share. What is it? How do you get it? All that sort of stuff. House, dog, kids. Right? Like, even as you're saying that, I'm like, picket fence, right? Wraparound porch, opportunities achieved through hard work. Yeah. Ability to be successful as you define it. American dream, allowing aspirations and goals to be achieved for all. Pursuit of life, liberty, happiness, equity. Yep. A good career. Yeah. And even to go to this idea of what Fred said, of opportunities achieved through hard work. Sometimes there's that idea of meritocracy, that idea of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. If you work hard enough, the possibilities are endless. You can go to this like this place where anything is possible for anyone. Now, the tricky part about that is if we believe that to be true, that if you work hard enough, then you can have anything. Can people share in the chat what assumptions might we make about someone if they are then struggling to have those things? I'm saying good education opportunity for all kids. Yeah. So if someone is not as successful, if we believe in the American dream, what might be the reasoning for that? Someone has some boots and those boots have straps. Oh, I love that. They didn't work hard enough. Maybe they're lazy. They've had access to resources to be successful, right? So yes, all of this is showing how if we believe that anyone can do it, no matter how, like, as long as they work hard, it's also assuming, I really love that, they assume that they have boots and those boots have straps. That's not necessarily true. And thus we could look at someone who has not achieved those things and see that as an indication of their level of hard work. Or how if they've pushed themselves toward it. So when we're talking about counter narratives, these are narratives, truths, and experiences that arise from the vantage point of those who have been historically marginalized. These can be a collection of individual experiences that run against the dominant narrative or dominant stereotypes about their group. So for example, if we were to open up our minds toward counter narratives, we might be thinking as it relates to the American dream of, wow, okay, maybe there's some people that historically have not been provided as much access to resources and opportunities as others. Maybe even when we're talking about education systems, what is the education system someone is a part of and how does that impact their ability to do those things? When it comes to supporting family, when it comes to what their view of success is, now we can hopefully have more of an open mind toward this. I'll even speak from my own example. When you talk about things about the American dream, sometimes I think about husband, wife, boy and a girl, dog, right? All that sort of stuff. As someone that is in a same-sex relationship, there can already be that feeling of, is that American dream for me if that's not what I necessarily see for myself? And when it comes to these dominant narratives, it's not just certain people that ascribe to them. There could be even people that struggle themselves and they also believe in those dominant narratives because that's what we believe we need to do in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to be successful in our jobs and things of that nature. So I want to talk a little bit about more when it comes to the interconnectedness to this as it relates to decision making. So biases and dominant narratives significantly influence decision making. Biases can go in different directions. Sometimes if I meet someone that is from the East Coast, I have a potentially unfair bias where I think they're awesome just because of the fact that I am from the East Coast. So I'm like, all right, cool. Like I already feel good. I was just talking about this with someone, how if I walk into a home and I see a menorah or mezuzahs or other things that relate to my Jewish culture, I might have a feeling that I am safe there or that that is a place that is for me, when in reality, I don't know that. I don't know that for sure, even if we have those shared religious practices, perhaps. And the same thing can go for people that we're unfamiliar with. So we have to be aware of how we're making those decisions. Also, dominant narratives around what makes someone a good fit, what makes someone eligible for something. What are we looking at when we think about a good communicator, a good employee? We're probably filling in a lot of blanks about what we believe to be true that might not be true for all. Biases can shape our perceptions, judgments, and choices. Very often when people are looking at who they believe to be high potential, sometimes those people they believe to be high potential are people that are just like them. So that's where that can come in too. Dominant narratives often emerge from societal norms and cultural biases. I'm curious if people could even share in the chat, and I hope I'm not accidentally hooching this from a later part, so I apologize if I am. But even when we're thinking about societal norms, what are some norms that relate to decision making of what we might think makes someone a good employee, or what makes someone good at a job, or even some societal norms as it relates to the workforce? What makes someone a good in that? Can people share in the chat some of those dominant narratives that might be true for some, but are not necessarily good for all?
You know, Becca, you were facilitating so well that I forgot that I was a co-facilitator, and I was about to jump in the chat and add a few things. I was like, oh, Justin.
I love that. So style of dress for success, right? Like are you dressing professionally? And even that idea, Donna, professionalism of attire. How are we determining what professionalism means? And obviously there's things that relate to hair, that relate to how fancy someone is dressing, appropriate things for gender norms, right? There's a lot of things that can fall into that. A degree, especially from a prominent institution. And Heidi, to go to that idea, when we say prominent institution, what blanks are we already filling in terms of what makes an institution a prominent institution? Level of education, absolutely. A norm that the American/US English accent is the correct one. Absolutely, in terms of if someone's easily or not easily understood. This can happen with names as well, in terms of biases we might have just by seeing someone's name. One of my best friends, her name is Ryan, her sister's name is Taylor. Her mom specifically decided to call them names that people couldn't tell if it was a boy's name or a girl's name, because before they were even born, she was thinking about what would increase their likelihood of getting good jobs or opportunities. And she figured if people think they're men, that might help them, right? Some employers believe African Americans are always late. Some may believe Asians are always overachievers, right? So sometimes there can be stereotypes or biases around different groups in terms of what they might or might not be able to offer, which can be also very detrimental to understanding people's individuality. Let's keep moving through in terms of looking at some of these things. So dominant narratives are prevalent in various aspects of life, including decision-making. Examples of common dominant narratives: gender stereotypes, racial biases, socioeconomic disparities. I think about that in terms of when we're also thinking about promotions or bandwidth, or who has the ability to do certain things. Sometimes we make certain assumptions based on people's life circumstances about if it's a good time for them for certain things without giving them the ability to make those decisions. And they can influence decision makers' attitudes, beliefs, and actions. When we're looking at statistics around who are individuals that are getting promotions. I can't remember what the statistic was. I want to try to find it, but there was something about the level of men that are over 6 feet, which is relatively low. The level of CEOs that are over 6 feet is alarmingly high. There might be something about people assuming a sense of power or control just in looking at someone's height and how that can impact different opportunities that those individuals have. So there's just so many different levels to this. And finally, to look at the potential consequences of our unconscious biases. So unconscious biases operate beneath our awareness and impact decision-making. That's where they can get a bit tricky, right? As Justin was saying before, they can be automatic, deeply ingrained. And so it involves us really needing to slow down and notice those biases before they can potentially take hold. If I hear someone with an accent from the East Coast, that moment where I'm like, ooh, I have to say, stop, it's an accent. Just because you can relate to it does not necessarily mean that they are your friend or they are the perfect fit for this. Take a step back and try to be in deeper consideration. Some consequences of unconscious biases: reinforcement of existing inequalities and stereotypes, especially as we perpetuate the same decisions over and over and over again, as people were talking about earlier. We also talked about this as well: limited perspectives and missed opportunities for innovation. I always challenge people to think about, is something wrong or is something different? If something is wrong, if it is unethical, if it is illegal, that's one thing. We might need to stop that. But if something's different, we might assume it to be wrong just because it's outside of how we've always done things. And that can be at the expense of inclusion and bringing in other voices because we assume something's wrong just because it's different. And now I'm perpetuating the same thing over and over and over again. Unequal distribution of resources or opportunities. So especially as we're thinking about who could be a high potential employee, we might put a ton more resources into that individual because we see their potential at the expense of somebody else who has a lot to offer. And awareness and mitigation of unconscious biases are essential for fair and inclusive decision-making. So we just have to take that moment to think about how to increase our understanding of this and to notice these things as best as we possibly can.
And Becca, as right before we go to looking at the concept of multipartiality, I definitely need the stats on the CEOs and the
I'll pull it up right now as you're talking.
Thank you.
Yes.
Let us know. And also the quotes, you know, there's some research that we need you to let us know. And we'll do that. So what we're going to look at now, you all, is understanding multipartiality. It may be a new term for some, and so we just want to make sure that we define it in a way that makes sense, because it is not necessarily a new term, but as the saying, when we know better, we do better. And so when looking at multipartiality, the framework is balancing that social power. So as you see on the screen, as a leader, as a facilitator, as an ally, you can practice multipartiality by highlighting the experiences outside of the norm. And so it's not that we completely dismiss the norm, but we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that status quo, and that is true for some, but that is not true for everyone. So then we welcome in those other factors. So thinking about multipartiality, we want to balance it. We're recognizing the status quo. We understand that the status quo isn't true for everyone. So now let's bring in those counter narratives. And those counter narratives are those experiences, as Becca said, that are experienced by those that have been historically marginalized. So, and guess what? They both can exist. They both can exist. And so we have this awesome diagram here that breaks down what we see. We know neutrality was the thing. We want to be impartial. And, you know, the saying years ago was, "I'm Switzerland." That was the saying that dominated all the conversations. Look, even in school, like as kids, like I promise you, I didn't really even know what that meant. But every time an argument broke out, I was like, "I'm Switzerland, I'm Switzerland." You all, I probably couldn't even have known where Switzerland was on a map. But I know that I knew that phrase, and I would say that phrase often. And so when we are neutral, the dominant side tends to win. And that's because the dominant side typically has more power. So when we are neutral, we think that we're stepping back and balancing. However, the side with already the decision-making power, the side with all of the power is now winning. And then partiality and advocacy, as it's often called, that was the counter to neutrality. Like, well, no, the dominant side is winning. Those with power are winning consistently. So now let's put the power in the hand of those that have not had it. And so that's like going from one side of the boat to the other. So this side was heavy with dominance, and now we're going all the way over here, and we're completely dismissing those that have that the status quo actually works for. And remember, we want to balance the social power. We're not trying to necessarily imbalance it where we're giving all of these opportunities to these people or all of the opportunities to these people. And so when we looked at neutrality versus partiality, there was still an imbalance. So that's where multipartiality comes in. It says we recognize the status quo is true for some, and then we know that it's not true for everyone. So now let's bring in all of these different narratives as well as the status quo, because we're bringing in the ones that work for everyone. And so, and I know that the diagram shows a 50-50 split, but that may not be the case. It may be 60-40, it may be 75-25, it may be 55-45. So though it's shown as 50-50 with the arrow with multi-partiality, that changes, that fluctuates. So once again, recognizing that the status quo is true for some, but also those that it's not true for, I want to also bring in those narratives which showcase that. And so now if you're like, Justin, I'm still on the fence of multi-partiality, it's like, okay. Well, what I want to do now, so earlier we gave this definition that it's balancing social power. We have this particular diagram here, which shows how initially we started with neutrality, then we saw partiality, then also having the boat imbalanced as well, and then we get to partiality. So now we'd love for us to do to practice multi-partiality in decision-making so that we get to see it as an example. And then we welcome any questions, any comments. I know this is a webinar, but if you want to throw tomatoes, we will accept those as well. It just comes along with the territory. So with practicing multi-partiality in decision-making. So as you see on your screen, ASA is restructuring JSM for 2024 in complement of their new DEIB initiative to be more inclusive, equitable, and accessible. The leadership team, comprising diverse statisticians, meets for a decision-making meeting. Multi-partial decision-making is demonstrated in this meeting. So, the facilitator actively invites and encourages multi-partial perspectives, especially from those with diverse backgrounds and experiences in the decision-making conversation. So we first have that those with diverse backgrounds are now brought to the decision-making table, because it was stated earlier that those that have power aren't necessarily at the table. And especially those that have those diverse backgrounds or perspectives or diverse thoughts are typically left out. And so now we also have the team actively seeks input from members with diverse backgrounds. So I am actively going out. That's that action part that Becca spoke about. It's not good enough to just be theory. Like you have to put it into practice. So I'm actively seeking out. So work has to be done. So we actively going out to bring people with diverse backgrounds to be able to come in to actually voice their challenges to the status quo and really do offer fresh insights. And know that when you're challenging the status quo, we're not challenging people individually. I am not trying to insult your character by saying that we want more diverse perspectives, because especially as we are literally in more of a globalized society, I mean, we just had JSM in Toronto, in Canada. So we see just how international it is, even though it's just right up north for us. It's really important to understand that we want to ensure that the entire collective is not only represented, but that they are seen and heard as well. And also it states that team members engage in open and respectful dialogue. That's that communication policy that we mentioned earlier. And then actively listening. So active listening has been a very popularized term the last couple of years as well, is where you're actively listening. So you're not listening to respond. You're listening to understand. And you know, people, and I'm pretty sure you all have noticed it, you can tell when you're speaking to someone and they're listening to respond because they're about to cut you off at every minute. And it's like, are you actually listening, or are you're ready to jump in on the conversation? So we want to make sure that we are actively listening. And so, and that means you're considering different viewpoints, even if they differ from your own. And one of the things that Becca and I talk about in our active listening sessions is that when you are actively listening, we can still often hear something completely different from what the other person has said. So what I would say, so Becca, what I'm hearing you say is, and then I repeat it from my understanding. And then Becca has the opportunity to say, Justin, that's not what I meant. And also like, Justin, where did you even get that from? Because that is not what I said. Or exactly, you're exactly right. And so that is to ensure that we are communicating in a way that we both understand and that we're not communicating on a basis of misunderstanding. And then so it also says decision-making considers the statistical community's needs and challenges. And with that community, it's everyone. It's not just the majority, it's everyone. So every part of the community, we want to make sure that they're not only represented, but their needs are taken into consideration and their challenges as well. Because if, as I stated, I was raised on a farm, and my father always say, in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. Honestly, in certain instances, if I hear that JSM is in Toronto, then my mind is now like, oh wait, how can I get there? Like, where is the nearest airport? Yes, yeah, I'm in ASA, but now I'm trying to figure out, have a person like myself been considered? And what if I'm differently abled as well? And I'm in a rural community, how do I get to the airport? Will there actually be accommodations at the place where where the conference is being held, where the meetings are being held? So all of these things, we're practicing multi-partiality by ensuring that the status quo is that our members are going to love having an in-person session in Toronto. Are we thinking just about the majority? Or are we thinking about everyone in the community? So I think that's really, really, really important. And so Maria says, since you are talking about changing JSM in 2024, JSM organizers need to rethink the registration fee for kids. It affects families and single parents, but women the most. It would be good to bring this to their attention. And thank you for that, Maria, because I'm pretty sure that Kristen and Donna are taking a note of that. And even thinking about my granddad being a brilliant numbers person, even if I was introduced to that as a kid, instead of later in life and struggling with, that this is actually like, though there are people who are like me at this age who are experiencing this as a kid, and it also being an option and even a financial option would have been great to have as well. So I'm excited that this is actually a great conversation that we're having. Also, seniors working part-time. Thank you for that, Michael. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you all feel free to drop these in the chat, especially if multi-partiality is resonating with you and you're thinking of things that will allow multi-partiality to take place even more in ASA. And also, so as you see on the screen, the team challenges dominant narratives and biases, critically examining assumptions. And this is not like personal, like I'm personally going to attack the assumptions, but I'm critically doing it in a way in which I am attacking bias. Like the goal is to be equitable. And so decisions are evidence-based, data-driven, and approached from a multi-partial perspective. So, and it says this multi-partial decision-making process results in a well-rounded and inclusive diversity and inclusion initiative that considers various perspectives. So we see seniors, we see parents, we see single parents, and we also see moms being affected. So just even what Maria and Michael posted in the chat, we're looking at all the different parts. We're not thinking about just university professors. We're not thinking about those that work in other different industries, but we want to encapsulate everyone that's a part of the association. And so I think that is important to really foster an equitable conference. I think it's really, really, really important that we do that. And so, and if anything has come up about multi-partiality or a multi-partial decision-making, let me know in the chat. I would love to hear about it, especially even if this was your first time hearing about multi-partiality. If anything comes up, like drop that in the chat. even if you want to make it anonymous, you can send it to Casey, and Casey will then will let us know as well. So I really do appreciate that. And so we are now at the point of the session where there is a Q&A. So I would love, love, love for you to drop those in the chat, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. And even if some questions are for Donna and Kristen, drop those as well. But we're taking everything, and then we're giving the information and the questions back. Mary says, any advice on how to reconcile divergent needs, service animals, animal allergies? That now, Mary, now, are you mentioning specifically at the conference or just overall? Overall, got it. So and that's a very good question. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a college professor here in Los Angeles. And so a lot of students have service animals, and there are also students with certain allergies as well that were in the particular classroom. So what I would say, more work is to be done. However, restructuring does not mean dismantling the good that's been done. So we're just going to make accommodations. Like, so if animals are there, like, then that just means that there are ways in which we can work certain things, as far as sessions, how rooms are set up. If there's majority people that have allergies, but there's a service animal there, maybe we can do a virtual option for just that session at the conference. Maybe we can have rooms set up where if there are a service animal room versus those that have allergies. Like, there are ways. It should not be completely dismissed. There are ways in which we can actually work these things out. Becca, I see that you're off mute.
Yeah, I think something that's also helpful is getting in front of it in terms of what accommodations are going to be put in place so that people can plan accordingly as well. So for example, if anyone's ever been to a show where they say there might be flashing lights during this performance in case anyone's sensitive to that, or sometimes if it's, we are going to be having captions available at this thing. But I think that the reason I say that is then sometimes people are able to plan more accordingly. So for example, if someone had an animal allergy and they know that they have allergy medication that works for that, but they wouldn't even know to bring that because they didn't know that service animals were going to be there. I think there's a way that things can also be put out to say, like, in order to make sure that we are incorporating accommodations for everyone, there may be service animals present. There may be this, there may be that, just so that people can then think about the things that they need to do. And as Justin was saying, in terms of space, I know in certain places I've been in, I know this is a little bit different, but even just having areas that are specifically for people that need to be wearing masks versus people that don't, or people that want to be around other people that are wearing masks versus people that don't. There's different ways to cue that or to create pockets for certain individuals. And I think the same thing can happen in terms of parts of a room that people can be in, as Justin was saying, to make sure that they're making sure that they're taking care of themselves. I'm digging the multi-partiality approach. I can see it being useful and getting buy-in from my colleagues in their work. It would work well with our already existing strategies and even make them better. Yeah, that's so great to hear, Heidi. Thank you for sharing that. Donna, I have to sign off. Thanks everyone for joining the seminar. Oh, that's from Ron. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Ron, for sharing that. So this was a way of showing these are examples of what could be done so we can see what we mean, because sometimes we talk about these things theoretically, but that's very different than what that looks like in practice. So this was a way to see what that looked like if we were thinking about how to put that multi-partial approach into practice. And that's also why it's so helpful to hear from people in the chat in terms of things that you were thinking, because the more that we can get a sense of people's individual experiences or how to incorporate more of those counter narratives that might not necessarily be included in those decision-making process, the better, so that that planning can be done, you know, for the future. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ron, for saying that.
Yeah. And this is just one, like, this webinar is just one of many examples of Ron and the entire team coming together to focus on DEIB and being able to make it a part of the culture. and not just these webinars, but seeing the actual work being implemented. And I'm pretty sure JSM is going to look different in 2024. And so we're just excited that the work is being done, and even provide a space where you all can actually state in real time in the chat what is working, what isn't working, how you can even implement it. So thank you for that.
Also that it's a process. I think, to go back to Ron's point as well, that sometimes we know that there's something, that needs to be tended to, and we try something, and when we try it, we're like, all right, well, that's what worked well for that, and that's a part of it that didn't work well. And it's about adjusting and continuing to keep expanding and building on that. Sometimes I think there could be pressure to say, how are we making sure that we are doing this completely right the first time? And while we would love that to be the case, sometimes that's a pretty loaded term, even in terms of what right is. And so that's something that's always going to be progressing and developing and shifting with shifting needs.
Yeah, it's like I always say, the theme post-COVID, if you can say post-COVID, the theme post-COVID is pivoting. You really do have to pivot. You can plan something out. And first of all, thank you, Donna, for dropping that link in the chat. Like being able to pivot. Maybe it's worked in the past, maybe it's not working now. Maybe we planned it, we get there in person, and we now have to pivot because something we didn't consider, a variable in the equation, has shifted or changed or morphed. And that's because we live in a society that is changing ridiculously. I mean, just even talking to Kristen at the start of the session, with tornadoes in DC, it's like having to pivot and things like that happening constantly. So I think just being of the mindset that we are flexible, like we are in that position. Don says, having these conversations and sharing knowledge is an improved direction and foundation for better action. Thank you, Don. I really do appreciate that. And as Becca stated earlier at the top of the session, we wanted to make it conversational so that you feel comfortable enough to share these ideas and to be able to exact change, because that's exactly what we want.
Definitely. And I think about this a lot when it comes to even watching, and maybe we'll even say this next time in our next session, but when we watch certain movies or TV shows or read certain books, I'm like, oh, that didn't age well. And part of the reason that those things have not aged well is because we now have a new understanding of what appropriate language and behavior is around certain things. And the way that we get to that point is by shifting those narratives, and people hopefully having a space where they're able to speak up and share those things. And so that's all part of that process.
And thanks, Kristen, for dropping in the link to the next webinar. We do hope that you will attend that. Tell your fellow members as well to join, especially if you joined the first one, or if this is your first one. We would love to see as many of you back as possible to hear even how, even if you implemented any of the things that we've spoken about, how that has resonated. Did you have to pivot in that regard? As well. Did anyone use any of the quotes that Becca dropped earlier? So I think that would be just great to hear as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I was just looking at that. It's Stephen Covey, who, and then I just started looking him up to be like, what's his deal? Let me make sure I'm quoting someone that I want to be quoting.
Yes,
but regardless.
I have so many of his books. I mean,
all right, there you go.
Business School. Inundated with Stephen's books.
Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, great to hear it, Heidi. Thank you.
And also, for those that are still here, we will take statistics jokes in the chat as well periodically throughout the session. We know that, we understand how important this topic is, but it is also, we're shifting cultures. We really do want to make it a lifestyle and not just something that lives inside of a webinar or a Zoom conference or things like that. So insert as much of yourself and your personality into these sessions as well, because the topics are timely. Thank you, Cynthia. You're falling trippingly off the tongue and the finger. So I really do appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. You know what, Ron, after this run, I typically have math jokes the entire session, but I didn't for these sessions because I'm like, you already know them all. Like you're already in my world. So I will definitely check in with Bryn about your jokes. And Ron, I see that we're already friends. So
You
we'll
were just worried, Justin, that your math jokes wouldn't add anything.
really. And
It's
yeah,
like,
I promise you, like, what did you remember about that session? And you're gonna remember that joke, that random math joke that Don said, thanks for the excellent information conversation. I'm not a statistician, have no idea how I found these webinars. However, they have been amazing.
It's
Don,
amazing. I love it.
thank you for that.
Well, Justin, this is Donna, and I just want to jump in and say to Don, he is welcome to join our community at any time. So
I love it so much.
Have your personal invite, Don.
I love it so much. Someone's
Thank
like,
you
I'm a
all.
chef, but this was great.
Maris, I would say dad jokes with a capital B.
Rebecca.
Really. Okay, you all. Thank you.
Yeah,
Once
thanks
again,
everyone.
yeah, remember the link that Kristen dropped in the chat. We would love to see you for the third webinar, and your input, your jokes, whether dad jokes, whether stats jokes, whether civilian jokes. We will,
Yeah.
we take a multi-partial approach to jokes. So we will accept them all.
I'll confuse them.
Yeah.
And Justin and Becca, I'll just let everyone know that we are, with your permission, posting the recordings on the website the link that I put in earlier. So if folk want to share the recordings of these sessions with friends and colleagues, they're available. Well, this one will be, the first one is up, will be available at the website, on the website.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that, Donna. And when you share it with your colleagues and your friends, please let them know that ASA will happily accept their membership as well. And yeah, continue to join the organization for future sessions.
Fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day as well, Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.